Okay, this is lecture 8.2, and this one is almost definitely going to be pretty long. So if you want to pause, go to the bathroom, get some coffee or whatever you need, go do that right now. So in this one, we are talking about the very basics of how do social movements work. And as a former union organizer and multi-decade union activist, I know a whole lot about this stuff. Unions in general operate very similarly to most social movements, and if anything, unions tend to do it in a little bit more of a structured way, but it is all effectively the same behavior. And union organizers, and actually most social movements, uh, use these three steps to do it. But within union organizing, because it's institutional, there's actually a saying to go with it, and it's called educate, agitate, organize. And we are going to break up this lecture based on these three words, principles, whatever. So, uh, the mantra of the labor movement is educate, agitate, organize. Educate means to teach potential members or of your movement what they need to know to understand what you're talking about or understand what the problem is. Agitate, appeal to the members for what resonates with them, right? How does this thing you just educated them on relate to their personal life? Sometimes strategically, it could make sense to get them angry about the thing if we're talking about how to propel a movement, but that's not always the way to do it. But that's why the word agitate is used, is because a lot of times anger is used. And then organize. It is not helpful to get someone really angry about something and then walk away. You have to show them what they can do to help. And the standard operating procedure in union organizing then, and again, in most social movements, this is a good thing to do, is to give them a job to do. That is often called the ask. So you have a new member, they're super duper excited, they want to help, well, give them a job to do, and you're not only going to give them something that they can feel good about themselves, but if you are being pretty calculated about this, and when I say calculated, I'm not using that in a negative sense, I'm using that in a strategic sense, you can gauge how good they are at that thing and then maybe give them future jobs that they'll be able to be good at. Because what you're trying to do in a social movement is get people to the job that they're going to be good at, right? You don't want your press liaisons person to be afraid of talking in front of cameras, for example. Conveying knowledge, though, is a social relation, right? Uh, the person that is teaching you, that is telling you about something, has to be at least somewhat trustworthy. It's similar to teachers, right? If you think I am absolutely full of it and I don't know anything, I'm not sure why you have watched this far into the lectures, quite frankly, or you're still in this class, right? Unless I don't know why people stay in classes they hate, but that's beside the point. It's all about trust. Education is about trust. You have to trust the person. Um, the more you trust someone, the more you trust the educator, probably the more you're going to get out of it. And then also, that's good too. You shouldn't trust a teacher that you think is just full of it too, right? And then also, the institution that the teacher is associated with absolutely makes a difference. You believe me to tell you things. Don't you love meta commentary? Because partially you respect the institution, right? But also you have to, you really want to believe I know what I'm talking about because you're paying thousands of dollars for the course, right? So that also adds to a certain degree the trust to it. And then you base trust on previous relationships, right? If teachers have not treated you well up to this point in your life, you probably aren't going to trust me. And if you have had bad classes at OSU, or if you personally dislike me because of previous experiences, there certainly are people who do, that also could cause you not to trust the things that I say. I once got into an argument with a dear friend of mine, and honestly, this argument hurt our relationship pretty profoundly. We were talking about COVID vaccines in the time when we didn't really know what was happening, and since then, my friend has become a pretty staunch anti-vaxxer, and this is deeply troubling to me. And I said to him, no, I am not a microbiologist or a virologist, right? I don't fully understand the process, but I do trust science. And from a very technical standpoint, trusting is not what you need to do with science, right? When you're analyzing a piece of scientific work, you shouldn't inherently trust the person. You should be analytical about it if you're being a research scientist. But to a certain degree, you do, at a certain point, have to trust the scientific process, because the person providing the information probably does know more than you about the thing, right? So I don't trust somebody just because they're a scientist, but I do trust the scientific process because it's a process I really believe in. That's difficult, and that's hard, right? And that's something a lot of scientists don't like to talk about, because it kind of undermines what a lot of science is about, right? It's hard to talk about. This is one of the harder things about being a science educator, is that I have to teach you both to not trust everything and then also to trust things. It's screwy. Additionally, then, in part of that screwiness, you need to learn, we all need to learn, we all need to refresh this regularly, how to cultivate knowledge, right? We have to learn who we can trust, and we have to learn who we cannot trust, right? You are incapable of learning everything that is needed to, quote, have you do your own research. That phrase drives me bonkers, because people who, quote, do their own research almost never know exactly what research is, and those people are almost never actually doing scientific research. But I digress. But this is hard for us today in our modern world, and it's not going to get easy anytime sooner. AI is part of that, but really the bigger part of it is people like to lie to win political fights. We are living in an era of disinformation, so you have to cultivate what sources do you find trustworthy. Hopefully you find an instructor at a university trustworthy, and hopefully those of us who are instructors at university are trustworthy, right? I don't present information that I think is false. And when I do present information that I think is false, I do my very best to correct myself. So one really good tool in this regard is a thing called NewsGuard. And it is a paid-for service. If any of you are going into teaching and you become part of a teachers union, most teachers unions and many other unions too provide free access to this tool, which is great. These slides are a little bit out of date. I think NewsGuard uses different symbols now. But what NewsGuard does is they provide a cookie for your internet browsers, and when a source is verified by NewsGuard to be good, it will give it a little green dot, like a good to go for this one. And I know this is a little out of date. I think the way they do it now is like percentage trustworthy, which is fine. But if something is not a news source, or if, I'm sorry, I correct myself, if something is a known lying news source, it gets a red. I really like NewsGuard because not only does it say, yes, these people are telling the are likely to be telling the truth, no, these people are likely to be lying, they also work for things that are absolutely not news, right? So if your brother puts together a website and that website, even if it gets a lot of traffic and a lot of likes or whatever we're doing at the moment, NewsGuard likely won't give it any kind of score, not because they don't have the capacity to do that, because actually they're really cool, they're pretty big. But what they will classify as news or not news is pretty strict too, right? So both BBC.com and Breitbart are technically presenting news, but BBC is a known trustworthy news source, and trustworthy being determined by a number of factors that I do not have time to go into because this is going to be a hella long lecture. But Breitbart is a known liar, right? So on BBC.com we see the little green check, and on Breitbart we see a little red check to mean, hey, go ahead and look at this, but watch out, they have definitely been known to lie in the past. Really, really pretty interesting. And you can see right there, Biden crime wave, the woke wars. If you're even a little bit politically savvy, you will know that this is, and if you don't necessarily know Breitbart obviously, they're a very right-wing news source, but also they're liars. I also like about news source, I'm sorry, NewsGuard, that if you look at Fox News and if you look at MSNBC, both of which are known to have like a bias toward being Democrat or Republican, both of those have pretty high good scores too, because people make a lot of are highly critical of Fox News especially. Well, they present information and they may have a slant on it, but they're not straight up lying, right? Breitbart lies, right? And there's a lot of stuff on the internet that straight up lies, and it's good to know what those lies are. A really good example then, to get away from news sources and back onto, well, how do you build trust? The Practical Farmers of Iowa have done some really great work in terms of building environmental consciousness among just normal everyday farmers. And it's really great because farmers are also being manipulated to just kind of do things that big companies would want them to. Agribusiness corporations, most farming that happens in the United States is driven by massive corporations. It's not just manufacturing, it's also farming. And a lot of those are corporate the whole way down, but a lot of it, the private farmers that we still have in the United States, they are targeted to be controlled as much as possible by those corporations. Those corporations go a long way to manipulating farmers. One of those, a huge way, is by giving free hats. It sounds really stupid, but think about being a farmer. You're out there in the hot sun, and you need a hat. You really need a hat to see things, to keep the sun out of your eyes, to soak up the sweat a little bit. So these companies, they just send hats out. Send hats out. They say all kinds of nonsense crap, right? And your average farmer, and I've known quite a few, will just wear a hat. Well, I don't know what this. Great, I don't care. Well, you don't know about the thing now, but you might be ordering it in coming years, and then you go, oh, look, my hat says Roundup. I like this hat. I'll get Roundup. That's how it works a lot of times. It's not that the farmer is dumb. It's that they've had this hat that says Roundup for the last who knows how long, right? This is explored pretty well in a documentary that I really like called King Corn. Sometimes I show it for the course, sometimes I don't. When the course is fully online, I usually don't. But check out King Corn. It was made in the early 2000s. If you're like me and like getting really angry about the corn industry, oh man, I have so much to say about corn, but I'm not going to point it out right now. So what PFI has done is open dialogue with farmers to talk to them about how pesticides and GMO products and these things that basically elitist liberals love to talk about, they just kind of just throw it at people, right? A lot of people are guilty of this. Just throwing information at people and talking down to you if you aren't of my opinion. That's no way to win anybody, especially the previously mentioned conservative white male farmers, right? Farmers are very careful people, and farmers have spent years learning how to do the things they know to make money the way that they do to feed their family. And they're not just going to listen to you because you think you're smart, because they know what they know, right? And I really respect that. So how do you get past that, right? Because the farmer almost definitely knows more about farming their land than any scientist. So how do you bridge that gap? Well, a great way to bridge that gap is to build a true partnership with the farmer. You say, okay, sir, check out what I have to show you. What I have to show you is pretty cool. And this isn't exactly the illustration on the slide, but the illustration on the slide is pretty good too. Let's say you're a corn farmer and you use these pesticides that are pretty bad for the environment, but they do allow you to grow a whole lot of corn. Well, will you lease to me an acre of farmland so that I can grow corn organically on your acre of farmland? And you can even have that corn when you're done, right? But at the end of the season, we can look at my corn and your corn and see what works on your land, right? And if you're able to get that far, which again, it takes building a relationship, you can then say to the farmer, okay, look, this corn that I grew is as good. Maybe it's a little not as good, right? Maybe it's a little bit not as productive as the corn you dumped all your pesticides on and all your fertilizer on. But maybe it's pretty darn good. But I didn't spend money on buying the pesticides, and I didn't spend money on buying that non-organic fertilizer. Do you see how actually this works? And then those kinds of very practical conversations are how you get people who just don't care about your granola eating garbage to come along. And that's how you build the relationships, and that's how we're going to get to this next stage of society we want to get to. So it is exposure that allows it, right? Exposure theory, Exposure theory is also often called contact theory, states that if we have interactions with people from a certain group, we will have more positive perceptions of those group, right? And this research is backed up very well by implicit bias studies. So this does have to do with race as well. If farmers build relationships with scientists or academics, we can find new and better ways to do these things, including ways that are not damaging to the environment. Ohio State has an extensive outreach program. It is slipping my mind. I'm sure someone's, it is extension. There we go. It's called the OSU Extension. Most colleges have extension programs in their agriculture programs that reach out to like farmers and communities to show them like, well, how do we apply this knowledge? And those programs are amazingly good in this regard, and they're really pretty cool. And that's how you do it. You build relationships, right? It is so easy to cut people out of our lives, and sometimes it makes sense to cut certain people out of your life for your own health and well-being, but try to not do that as much as possible. Your uncle may have terrible opinions, but you probably do have a relationship with them as well. But really what we're trying to do is initiate phenomenological rupture. And I don't recall if I've mentioned this yet in this class or not. But phenomenological rupture is an unpleasant experience that causes someone to suddenly doubt the basis of the trust they had in a given process or ideology. So this is what makes changing your mind so hard, is you believed something, you trusted the person that told you that thing, and now that trust has to change, and maybe that trust is also hurt, and maybe that was like your parents, or maybe that is like your religion, right? That can be intensely hard. So this is why most people don't convert to different religions, right? Is because they have a worldview, and it's my worldview. These are all the things I believe. No, I'm not going to change it. This is what I believe. This is what I hold dear, right? But also a traditional farmer starting to use purely organic methods. And when I say traditional farmer, I mean someone who uses pesticides and someone who buys the products from the agribusiness companies. That's hard. It's really hard. It for some people can be as hard as like trying to convert them to a new religion. But this, I'm not saying we should convert people's religions, by the way. But what we do need to do is convert the way people do farming. So it's hard work. And it also relates to talking about paradigm shifts, and it has to do with talking about frame alignment as well, which is later on in this lecture. Phenomenological rupture is intensely difficult. So education is also critical to changing and keeping phenomenological rupture. Knowing something doesn't mean you can do anything about it. It is hard to be environmentally friendly. Almost all of us were taught for the last 30 years in elementary school, you have to be nice to the environment. Almost all of us. But the difference between people who maintain that worldview and people who just don't care are the feeling that you can make a difference is really the difference, right? And when people don't feel they can make a difference, it's often because they don't know how they can make a difference. And then not knowing how you can make a difference can make you feel like I feel too guilty about this, and thus I give up, right? There are a lot of people who just give up. It's not because they hate the planet. It's not because they don't love the children. It is because they are guilty, at least on a subconscious level. And education, though, has to go beyond simple indoctrination. If people readily agree with you, if that easy thing, you haven't done anything, right? You can tell them how they can do it better, but you haven't really done much. If you have someone that immediately agrees with you, show them something new, right? That's education then. Education has to be engaging, right? It has to be engaging. It can't just be listening to me drone on and on in this horribly long lecture. And by the way, this one is going to be long. Pause it and come back to it if you need to. That's totally okay. And I just paused there slightly. So if this is 2 days later, that's cool too. Anyway, please listen to the whole lecture though. Brain just blipped. It is okay to challenge, to be a little bit abrasive, right? It is okay to challenge your students, to push them a little bit, to troll them ever so slightly in order so that they may learn, right? Presenting data, making people just a little bit angry can be really helpful in the learning process, but you have to know how to do it. And that is definitely a finesse, and sometimes I screw it up too. But if you can present data to people and have them come to their own conclusions about the data, and they actually are learning something, that is actually a very, very powerful learning method. And it's really hard to do that. It's quite difficult to do that. And it's really hard to do that in an online setting. It's way easier to do that in person. So that's why we're not doing that kind of thing right here, right now, because you only have so much time for really long lectures. Agitate. So we did educate. Let's talk about agitate. After an organizer educates, they have to engage in what's called frame alignment. This is a sociological term. It's tied in with frame theory, and frame theory is dominated by David Snow and Robert Benford, who were very big in the early 2000s, and they both still do quite a bit of work. Their work then is based, at least partially, on the work of Erving Goffman, classic sociologist. Frame theory states that each of us holds many frames that can shape if or how we participate in a social movement. A frame being the worldviews of people and organizations, including political, religious, and other perspectives. So we talked about paradigms. Frames are paradigms. They are the lenses, the glasses, the goggles you look through to see the world. Like most sociological concepts, this mechanic can be used by a wide scope of players. Frames can be neutral. Frames can be really good. Frames can be thoroughly evil. Frames can be biased. Frames can be just kind of their own thing. Examples of frames. There are many Christian worldview frames. There are many socialist worldview frames, environmentalist, American frames, Republican frames, Democrat frames, Maoist frames. I could really sit here for, I'm not going to do that, but I could really sit here listing frames for forever, because I studied this junk in grad school. So understanding those frames, and I should have highlighted that if you're taking notes, maybe circle frame analysis. Frame analysis is the scientific examination of those frames of people or groups. And frame analysis is used mainly in the study of social movements, but it also can be used to understand many types of social groups. Typically, social movements want to cause positive change, but corporations could want to change your frame to sell you products. A cult could want to change your frames so that they could take advantage of you. So frame alignment then is the intentional or unintentional ways that movements shift frames to potential members and groups of people. I'm sorry, the picture is slightly in front of the words. I'll tell you this information the best I can. If you make someone else's worldview align with your own worldview, it's way easier to get them to do the things that you and your movement want them to do. This is basically what I've been saying for the last couple slides. So for example here, above, you could use a Christian frame if you're talking to Christians to talk to people in terms of getting them to donate money to help poor people, because that's something that's talked about a lot in Christianity. Or you could use patriotic in the picture below. You could use a patriotic imagery or inspiring imagery to encourage people to take part in a peasants' revolt in a revolution. And this is an image, I believe, from the Hungarian peasants movement of the mid-20th century. Both of these tie in with pre-existing ideas that people have. Bedford and Snow identified 4 frame alignment strategies: frame bridging, frame amplification, frame extension, and frame transformation. These are the 4 types. Many movements use multiple or all of these tactics. It's relatively rare for a movement to only use one tactic. That would actually be a pretty foolish move, really. But most movements do most of these things. Frame bridging is connecting one frame to another frame. These bridges are often not inherently part of pre-existing frames. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. For example, appealing to a Buddhist commitment to nonviolence, because Buddhism, built into the religion of Buddhism, is like strong prohibitions against hurting people. Anyway, by appealing to that in a Buddhist, it's pretty easy to get Buddhist people to come along to be part of an anti-war movement. And Buddhists are very often part of anti-war movements. Frame amplification then invigorates and magnifies the values behind the frame. So you take a cultural idea that people already know very well, and you use that to get people to go along with the thing that you want them to go along with. Here we see, and I'm not going to make this longer by reading it for you. Here we see the text of the national anthem of Ukraine. And this was the national anthem of Ukraine long, long before the conflict between the war where Russia invaded Ukraine. In what year did that start? 2022 maybe, I think. Anyway, this, if you read it, sounds exactly like what people in Ukraine have gone through in that war. But this was written, I think it's at least 100 years old. It was written a long, long time ago, right? But this resonates. This speaks to the thing. An appeal to patriotism is a really easy way to get people to go along with war or supporting the government. That's maybe super obvious, but that's because it's done a lot. Frame extension then widens boundaries by basically saying, do you see, okay, I see what you believe in, but do you see how this thing could also be related to the thing you believe in? That's frame extension. So an example of this would be to encourage a fundamentalist Christian to take part in environmentalist movement on the basis that this action is part of their duty to take care of God's creation. So many, as we've addressed, many Christian churches are already involved in environmental action because that matches their worldview. But some much more conservative Christian groups aren't environmentalist at all. But if you can get that group that isn't environmentalist to see that actually being nice to the planet is taking care of this gift that your God gave you, then that's a really good example of frame extension. Frame transformation then, and this is the one that you see the least because it's quite difficult, and it's only really achievable with a highly structured organization, and if you're able to manipulate people and starve them a little bit, it's easier. Frame transformation reconfigures the frame meaning in the individual. So this is the most radical tactic, and it's almost impossible. It's very, very difficult to do. The Heaven's Gate cult it is one of the more infamous cults in American history. What they did was they took, for most of the members of that cult, pre-existing Christian beliefs, and they convinced people that, oh, I see you're a good Christian, that's amazing. Well, did you know that Jesus was actually an alien? And did you know that I'm speaking as if I'm the cult leader. These aren't the things I believe. But me, the cult leader, I'm actually the second coming of Jesus, and actually I'm an alien soul in a human body, and that's very similar to your Christianity, the cult leader would say. And the way we get to heaven is actually by stopping the function of this body. They were a suicide cult. And after we stop the function of this body, we will go up to that comet that's in the sky, and let's do it. And people did. Really, and that's part of the elements of what makes a fringe a very weird, what would be called a weird religious organization versus a cult. You know, people have every right to be part of any religious organization that they have the belief to, but a organization becomes a cult when it makes you do things that you wouldn't, when it convinces you to do things, right? Be careful out there, guys. Organize. Once properly agitated, social movements have to organize their new members. And as a broad definition, this is talking about activism. Activism is the activity intended to bring about or prevent social change. So in the organized phase, we are trying to get people to do activism. Now, occasionally there are people that make claims that activism doesn't exist anymore. This misperception is fading, especially since the heavy activism of the summer of 2020. But people who were adults in the relatively tranquil 1990s and early 2000s still are known to kind of say things like this. It's not just people who basically have memories of hippies protesting think that hippies were the only ones to ever protest. The reality of the matter is that protest has always been in societies and always will be in societies, protest and activism. It's simply a matter of what does it look like here. Another misperception of protesters is that professional activists are inherently bad. Now, the term professional protesters, paid to protest, whatever, shows a remarkable lack of understanding of not only nonprofit organizations, but also the very strategy of protests. The reality of the matter is, nearly every organization that would back a protest has people who could classify as professional activists, and they always have had them. This is no new story. This does not mean that the people who do this protest are bad or immoral or don't believe in the thing they do. They simply do things that are different than those who are doing it on a volunteer basis. I have known many activists, so-called professional activists, on a number of fronts, and I will tell you that they do that job because they care. And the reality of the matter is that they want to be able to devote their life to the cause, and in doing so, though, they have to be paid to feed themselves. Additionally, in my experience, it's a really hard job. It's an intensely hard job, and those people aren't paid nearly as much money as as the amount of work that they actually do. And again, most of them don't work well beyond 40 hours a week. There are other people other than just, I guess, obviously union organizers or people who work for activist organizations, people like social workers. Social workers often do jobs that range from advocacy to maybe organizing a protest or something. Lawyers are also very often do activist work as part of their profession. I don't recall the exact rules of it, but many bar associations and most attorneys do what the term pro bono work, doing it like as giving back to the community. That is seen as being an important part of being a responsible attorney. Additionally, talked about union organizers, community organizers, teachers as well. Again, it depends on what the nature of what they're teaching looks like, and honestly and sadly, political climate. But teachers are also people who are often pooled to educate people about these things. That's not to say that we lying. It's simply to say that we are motivated by sharing truth with people. Now, in general, and really we see how these terms are neutral and without politics, these can be classified as one of two types. We have regressive social movements and progressive social movements. A regressive movement will attempt to resist social change, maintain the status quo, or go back to an earlier form of social order. The classic, or now classic, example is the Make America Great Again movement. Regardless of your actual political status, the Make America Great Again is exactly a statement of a regressive movement. We want to make America great. We are defining what great is again, right? We want to make it the way it used to be, right? Perfect statement of a regressive movement. A progressive movement then attempts to promote forward-thinking social change. So they want to try to change things in a way that they hadn't been before. Say something like making a city 90% carbon neutral. Well, I don't think there are any cities currently in the United States that are 90% carbon neutral. And if you pick a city like Cincinnati or something, I just picked it out of my head. Cincinnati is not 90% carbon neutral. If it was, we would all definitely know about it. But, and of course, yes, if you are politically conscious, you know or can put together that regressive movements tend to be conservative and progressive movements tend to be liberal. But that's not always the case. A really excellent example of this is the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club, I would hypothesize, and I'm almost positive I would be correct on this one, that the vast majority of members of the Sierra Club are probably liberal, right? Or progressive, or whatever word they want to use. But what Sierra Club is there to do is to protect forests, right? To maintain them the way they are or go back to a way that they used to be. That is a statement of regressive cause. So just throwing that in there. Now, social movements themselves are defined as any group of individuals or activists, whatever, with these three qualities. They must have leadership, organization, and an ideological commitment to promote or resist social change. Now, that last one is what makes it a social movement organization and not a different type of organization. You can have a just for fun softball team, and you would have leadership, you would have organization to the team, but unless you're trying to like raise money to raise abortion access or something along those lines, whatever cause you choose, that was just the one that popped in my head, that is that's a softball team. It's an organization. It's not a social movement organization unless they're trying to do a social movement thing. However, there are certain changes over the last decade or so in terms of how individuals communicate with each other, mostly through the internet, but part of it has to do with politics, that have caused us to question these qualifications. This organization that calls itself Antifa, but is often called by its opponents Antifa, listen to those pronunciations, Antifa, Antifa, right? And that's really super important, actually. This organization, which is not an organization really, or what is organization, is a mirror of a very old protest tactic, namely covering one's face going into a protest for a given strategic purpose. Now, this is almost always a misunderstood tactic, because most times anti-fascists are not shy about letting people know they are anti-fascists. They want to often remain anonymous toward the end of being able to kind of all mix together because they know they're going to be attacked by police, or in kind of a semi-military fashion, if they're going to get into a fight with a bunch of members of the Ku Klux Klan or a bunch of members of the bunch of neo-Nazis, they know who is on their team versus who's on the Klan's team, right? So that, which is actually a very old military tactic. The thing is, though, that this organization isn't really an organization, because it's more organized by somebody saying, hey, we're all going to meet up to stop these neo-Nazis from having a meeting, let's do it, right? Almost never are organizations that are labeled that second pronunciation, Antifa, almost never are they actually calling themselves anti-fascists. That pronunciation of it, you almost exclusively find in people who are both critical of anti-fascism, again, anti-fascism being not fascist, as in being not Nazi, so you wonder why people would be critical of anti-fascists. But those people who mispronounce it in that second pronunciation, I speculate with a great deal of, I hypothesize very strongly that that pronunciation came in as a result of xenophobia and as a result of making it sound more Middle Eastern, quite frankly. Because Antifa sounds American, but Antifa sounds almost a little bit Arabic. It's a very strange phenomena, that thing in particular. It's fascinating. If I still did research like that, I would do it, but I don't. What is leadership then? If our anti-fascist friends don't have organization, then our BLM friends don't really have leadership, which is also fascinating. So, as part of a lawsuit in Louisiana, a judge in 2017 determined that Black Lives Matter is not an organization that can be sued. Basically, what happened is that a woman believed that she had personally been slandered by Black Lives Matter. However, there was no such organization in Louisiana that called itself Black Lives Matter. Additionally, there is no national organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter, at least at the time of this recording, right? Black Lives Matter is not an organization, really. It's a hashtag. It's a slogan. It's a lot of things. And there are groups that call themselves Black Lives Matter Atlanta or Black Lives Matter Detroit, but it's not a group like that. And as such, and to sue an organization, you have to be able to sue like the president or the board of that organization. So that doesn't exist in this case. Now, there's plenty of organization to BLM on the national level, but what does it mean to be a leader of that group? It's really called into question in a really interesting way. I mean, you can make a not good argument that BLM is an SMO, but I think the argument that they are simply a social movement is a much better argument, and the judge in Louisiana also agrees with me. And then additionally, I mean, they're in her case, the way she worded it, there is nobody to sue. It's, again, people really should do their homework before filing lawsuits. So let's look a little bit at the strategy used by social movement organizations. If you are kind of getting tired, this would be a good point to take a little break because I have a lot of slides right here. Now, regardless of those actual qualities, let's look at the actual behavior of what SMOs do. I made these up, really, to present the material, right? But these are three very good questions that the leadership of a social movement could ask itself in terms of how to decide what it's going to do. And these are things that are taken into consideration by strategists, regardless of how I actually worded them on these slides. The first question is the philosophical makeup of the organizers. There are two broad categories of social movement tactics, those of contestation and consensus. I don't expect you to know those words off the top of your head at this moment. We're going to talk about them in the slides so you can know them for the test. Contestation organizers view those in power as being enemies, while consensus organizers view those in power as being potential partners. A contestation organizer views opponents as being enemies inherent, right? The people we are going up against are bad people and they need to be stopped. There is a certain political and argument strength to that too. If you can, and we talked about this with dualism, right? If you can convince your people that the enemy is actually evil, that can be quite powerful. To go along with that, contestation organizers may be more likely to break or bend the law. We'll talk about that in a few slides. Typically, they seek a zero-sum victory. So they want to absolutely rise up and dominate and maybe destroy the people, the group, the organization, the phenomena that they don't like, right? Additionally, then, these types of straight organizing tactics, as in like complete and total, extreme is maybe a word you could use, are much more common in extreme circumstances. You're like a revolutionary army is not going to not be contestation based, right? They're killing people for the cause. They're not going to not think that the people on the other side are evil in most circumstances. Um, what else here? That's pretty much it. Consensus based organizers then view those in power as being potential partners. This is much more likely to work with groups of opposing ideologies, right? Wait, that's wrong. No, I need to, that wording's not great. It's much more likely with groups of not entirely opposing ideologies is a good way to put it. You have to have some kind of common ground of any kind to be able to make a consensus solution possible. And really, the power of some of the greatest peacemakers in our world have been their ability to try to find common ground between people. It is far more likely for consensus-based organizers to seek win-win solutions, even if those win-win solutions are as not possible as the total victory solutions that the contestation organizer would seek. And you can learn more about consensus-type organizers by looking into a discipline called peace studies. I actually have my minor in peace studies I got in college. If you want to ask me things about that. Now, consensus organizing is not to be confused with consensus-based decision making. A group that is doing consensus-based decision making could use either consensus or contestation organizing tactics. Just don't confuse those two terms, they're different things. And the relationship between contestation and consensus, that careful balance, is called the double politics of contestation. The reality of the matter is that nearly all organizing, nearly every social movement organization is a combination of contestation and consensus. If you are purely contestation, you look like Nazis, or you are Nazis, or you are like a militant, dangerous organization that the kind of which luckily we have very few of in the United States to this point. If you are purely consensus driven, then you will be taken advantage of in most circumstances by your opponent, because your opponent doesn't want to do what you want them to do, right? You have to pose a certain threat to the opponent at a certain point. All of this is to say that there is a balance between these two things. And in determining how to seek that balance, that is, there are tools to do that. A lot of those tools are laid out in a very good book by Saul Alinsky called Rules for Radicals. It establishes the groundwork for modern contestation-based tactics. Those tactics are useful for both contestation-heavy organizers and consensus-based organizers. Alinsky said, one of his more famous quotes from the book is, "Change means movement. Movement means friction. Only in the frictionless vacuum of a non-existent abstract world can movement or any change occur without the abrasive friction of conflict." So what's he saying there? Is he saying that civil war is imminent? No, absolutely not. What he's saying is people are going to dislike you. If you have a social movement of any kind, there are going to be people who don't like you, is really all it comes down to. And what do you do with that? And how do you deal with the fact that some people don't like you and everybody doesn't love you? That's Alinsky's book. Barack Obama, he did not base his pre-political career on Rules for Radicals, but he definitely read it. And you can see if you organize, and by Obama was a very moderate president. He was by no means radical. but you can see knowledge of these tactics in his pre-political organizing if you really want to study that sort of stuff. I worked on the 2008 Obama campaign, and I will tell you from a social movement standpoint, the calls that were made were very intelligent. So, what is legal in society? This is your second question. The more mainstream a your organization is, the less likely they are to break the law. That makes perfect sense, right? We are a large organization. We have a building. We have staff. We pay our taxes on time. We march in the local parade, the local 4th of July parade. We're very established. Thus, we have a lot to lose if we start breaking the law. But if you start to break the law, especially unjust laws, as part of your social movement, that also can be very, very powerful. Now this is, don't take this as being totally true all the time, but I pretty firmly believe, this is not a scientific statement, this is my opinion, that the vast majority of people who get arrested as part of protests probably are intending to get arrested, right? Because getting arrested in those circumstances in a mass arrest is strategically useful to a social movement. If you can fill a jail with your people and get that in the newspapers, well, that's what Martin Luther King did in the when he wrote the letters from a Birmingham jail. Like, that's the thing, right? It is very politically useful to show how oppressive the government is toward you, etc. And on a somewhat related note then, those who do break the law can even be helpful to those that never break the law. This is called the radical flank effect, when a mainstream organization benefits from the actions of more radical, sympathetic organizations. So if there's an organization that believes in the same basic things as you, but your organization would never break the law, but their organization is really out there and kind of scares people a little bit, yes, can that make your group look bad? It can. But what is more common is it makes your group look like the less dangerous one. And sometimes society will start to listen to the, quote, less dangerous one when there is maybe a more, quote unquote, dangerous one. There's a lot of speculation that Martin Luther King would not have been as effective as he was if it weren't for Malcolm X, if it weren't for the Black Panthers, if it weren't for other members of the Black Power movement, because King had basically the same version of Christianity that a lot of mainstream white Americans had, while those in the Black Power movement had different ideologies, maybe not necessarily based in Christianity, and that made the civil rights movement look a heck of a lot more palatable to mainstream white America of that era than the Black Power movement. Then we ask, let's say this another way. This is just a point I made. On the other hand, the powerful may make a tactic illegal if they find it threatening, right? So strikes were completely without regulation for a very long time. From about 1850 to about 1930, strikes were neither legal nor illegal. It's not illegal to not go to work, right? Your boss can do what they want to do to you. So it was not illegal for everyone in an organized way to not go to work. The boss could just fire them, right? However, in the late 1930s, my brain's skipping the exact year, the National Labor Relations Act, and then what was tacked on to it called the the Taft-Hartley Amendment, the NLRA made strikes legally recognized and made it so that bosses could not fire workers for going on strike basically as long as they made up the rules. So part one, right? Strikes are now legal in the 1930s, and they still are to this day legal. However, what the Taft-Hartley Amendment did was make general strikes illegal. A general strike is a strike in which not only do workers in one workplace go on strike, but workers in other workplaces go on strike to support that first strike, and then the ultimate goal could maybe be the whole city going on strike. And that happened a number of times in the early 1900s before the passing of the Taft-Hartley Amendment. And that was an intensely powerful political tactic. It was incredibly powerful. And because of that, the people who were negotiating to make strikes legal said, fine, we will let you have small strikes, but we will not let you have general strikes anymore. That's a big difference between the union movement of the United States and other countries, is that we can't go on general strike. Again, we sort of can, it would be illegal, right? But what is illegal, right? And again, in social movements, the question of does legal mean right that's a big philosophical question there. So an SMO may choose to intentionally break the law to highlight the illegitimacy of the law, right? Now, obviously, different organizations would be less or more inclined to do it. If we're an organization that's trying to change the law, then certainly we would be more likely to break the law to try to change that law to show that the law is basically garbage. It's called civil disobedience. Civil disobedience actually is a word that Henry David Thoreau coined, so that's fun too. Civil disobedience is a tactic of breaking the law to get what you want. I've said that like 7 times in the last couple words. Now, okay, I think I made the point there. Direct action, then, is somewhat different than civil disobedience. Direct action is also an act of intentionally breaking the law, but it is less well, with civil disobedience, you are trying to convince someone that the thing you are doing highlights injustice, but civil disobedience itself is not achieving the thing you want. Direct action is achieving the thing you want, even if it is breaking the law. A very good example of direct action is when Native American advocacy groups, now given this would be most likely with more radical groups, but there have been a number of occasions when Native American activist groups have torn down statues, particularly of Christopher Columbus. That is a very applied, obvious form of direct action. They don't want that statue of Columbus there anymore, so we're going to tear it down, right? And hopefully nobody will put it back up again, because nobody really cares. That's kind of what's happened in the last couple years, because people have kind of recognized that Columbus was a monster. This is direct action. Direct action does the job you want it to do, while civil disobedience is a little bit more political and a little bit more abstract. The third question is, how does the organization itself make decisions? Well-established organizations tend to have a degree of political opportunity, while marginalized organizations have far less political opportunity. Political opportunity is your ability to, and that should probably be highlighted on the slide, political opportunity or political opportunity structures. You can maybe circle that. Your ability to get done in your local social environment compared to other organizations. It can be the openness of decision makers to listen to you, right? If you're a liberal cause, then Democratic individuals in the state house would be more likely to want to listen to you. That is a political opportunity. The implementation of power. Can, though, those politicians that are helping you actually do anything to fix it? That's also part of the structure. The structure of alliances, well, maybe your group can't do anything, but maybe a group that you are friends with knows somebody that could help you, right? Social movements are not just about organizing your people, they're about making strategic alliances with other people, and then the stability of all these factors, and the general social climate, etc. Now, SWOT analysis is, and if you've ever done SWOT analysis, you're probably immediately rolling your eyes. SWOT analysis is a tool that is very helpful to organizations, but if you have an organization and you want to use SWOT analysis, I would say use it very sparingly. Don't do it more than every 6 months, and that's too much, because it can get really boring really fast. So what SWOT analysis does is it applies and helps people think about what their strategic strength is in their social situation. So they look at strengths. What are the advantages that are present in your organization? Weaknesses. What are the weaknesses of your organization? Opportunities. What about our social setting could we take advantage of? And threats, what in our social setting could maybe hurt us, right? And usually how SWOT analysis works is you have a group of, you could have 4 people, where 4 people just have conversation about it, or you could have 100 people in which you break out into groups, and then those groups get together and they write it on a whiteboard or a chalkboard or butcher paper or the dirt or whatever, and we list these things, and sometimes it becomes more clear what the organization should be doing and what we need to be afraid of, right? Versus what are we afraid of and we don't need to be afraid of. This is very helpful in terms of strategic decision making, but again, I warn, don't let your group do this. Don't do it every meeting. It can get very boring very fast. Now, nearly any of these tactics, anything involved in your SWOT analysis, is dependent on the solidarity of your organization. Solidarity being defined as a sense of togetherness in a community or organization. It's the sense of we can do this together. Religious organizations often call it fellowship. Small towns could call it community. It is a sense of togetherness. And if you are somebody who's taken many sociology classes, yes, this is absolutely what Durkheim was talking about in terms of solidarity in civilization, but this is more on the micro level. But solidarity doesn't just happen, and there are many types of solidarity. So when you're building the solidarity within your organization, you have to build it and cultivate it. Again, this building and cultivating over time is what the so-called professional organizer would do, because this takes a lot of consistent strategy to it and putting energy into it over years. So we could have solidarity of interest, which is the material needs that can be met by working together, right? We might not necessarily like your group, but the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that is a statement of the solidarity of interests. We want the same thing, even if ideologically we are not the same people, right? Then we have the solidarity of sentiments, which over time individuals can build a sense of community between organizations. So people in your group are familiar with people in the other group. Your two groups get along pretty well, and you're in this fight together because you like each other, not just because it's strategically useful. That's solidarity of sentiments. Now, obviously, solidarity of sentiments is much more powerful than solidarity of interests, but over time and over very careful long-term strategy, solidarity of interests can become solidarity of sentiments. But when understanding solidarity in the environmental sense, the authors of one of our readings emphasize the importance of both dialogue and mutual aid. So we have to keep talking to each other in terms of a social movement. You have to keep talking to each other in terms of within your social movement. So all of your people have to have a relationship at least with the organization and hopefully with each other. But also your group, if it wants to really have more power, more community power, has to work with other groups in the community. And mutual aid then, and that should be highlighted. Mutual aid is the practice of helping our others, not out of a sense of transaction, but out of a sense of community. So if you help people in your community because that's what you do, instead of expecting something out of someone else, if it is not like a transaction of money, but rather you're helping, this is how you help your family, and start seeing the group as family, that is the essence of mutual aid. We help each other. And that concept of we help each other because we do, not because we expect it in the future, that is something that as a society, if we can build that idea, then that will go a very long way for doing the things that we're going to have to need to do. Now, the structure of your here's where we're talking about consensus-based decision making, and we will talk a little bit more about this in our final lecture, if I remember correctly. The consensus-based decision making is a way of holding a meeting and making decisions that takes a lot of emphasis to make sure that everyone present in the meeting is okay with what's happening. And that is really counterintuitive to the way that most people run most organizations, right? There's the idea of majority rules, and well, everyone's voted on it. Basically, tough luck if you voted against it. That idea of tough luck if you voted against it is not okay from a consensus-based decision-making mindset. And this can be really, really good for an organization if you're able to do it, but it requires that everyone that is in the meeting is trying to do what's best for the organization. So if somebody there is dead set on winning instead of doing what's best for everyone, it really falls apart rather quickly. So for this reason, consensus-based decision-making is far more common among grassroots organizations, anti-authoritarian organizations, anti-capitalist organizations. Those types of groups are far, far more likely to use consensus-based decision-making, namely because philosophical it matches up with what they believe in. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that in a future lecture, but this may be the longest lecture I've ever recorded, and thank you for hanging in there till the end, even if you did take a couple breaks.